too. So now we're going to have our round table here. Everyone up here is a writer with Athanatos Ministries in some respect, some way, some variation. O.J. Wolf Smasher, otherwise known as my... O.J. Wolf Smasher may have died. But
he's definitely dead.
He's totally dead. Wolf Smasher is dead. But Michael Pape, is he alive?
I think so, yeah.
All right.
I'm assuming so. Can you hear me? If so, then I am alive.
Very witty writer. Very clever. You got to pay attention when he talks to get the jokes. I mean, they're funny. I'm just saying you deliver them with a deadpan and...
What are you saying?
Nothing. Not a thing.
This is what happens when you have a linear round table.
I don't see a table. I was expecting a table.
I feel cheated.
So a short story artist to this point. We'll talk more. Joe Courtemanche here. Quite a bit of experience in writing in general, but how long have you been associated with this now?
I believe I entered the contest in 2013.
Okay.
And that was my first exposure to you, and all of you have managed to survive. And for anybody who's thinking about becoming a novelist and looking for a way to grow your writing, enter writing contests, and I've entered quite a few of them, and the Athanatos Ministries novel Christian manuscript contest is the absolute best because of the mentoring you get out of it. And they took my bloviated train wreck of a manuscript and told me exactly how I was approaching things wrong. Not what was wrong with the book, but how to more clearly approach it as a writer. And it's gone on to be a finalist in Operation First Novel and win the Genesis Award in 2015. And I really, truly credit Tony and his ministry with providing me that guidance as a writer.
I did not pay him. He is unpaid.
Which reminds me of my royalty.
Yeah. And then to my left here is Jamie Greening, the author of several books and some short stories. An early... did you find us through the writing stuff or through the conference stuff first?
It was through the Christian Manuscript Submission project, and through that you had the writing contest listed, and so I wrote a story just for that and turned it in.
Which one was that story?
The really good one.
It was the one...
it's called Convocation.
Yeah.
You said the goal was to write something in the tradition of C.S. Lewis, and so I wrote Convocation, which was based upon a psalm verse where it says, "Worship him, all you gods," which I always thought was an interesting verse. So in my story, Jesus is judging all the false gods of the world. And so if you'll imagine this great big convocation room with you've got Buddha and Allah and Zeus and Baal, and they're all hanging out like at a cocktail party. And then Jesus shows up and begins to judge them. I liked it. It only came in third place, so I'm still kind of bitter. As I've said several times since I got here, I don't know how I lost.
Well, if only you were a false god. It's
puny god.
It's clever story, and anyway, maybe that'll come up a little bit later. So he's been with us all the way back to when we did the short stories.
So that was like 2008 or 9. It had to have been there.
Yeah.
Because the book was published in 2010,
sure,
which includes that story.
All right. And then there's me, the least of these. Wow, why'd you raise your eyebrows?
I just felt bad for you.
Yeah. So, very early on in, so Athanatos is an apologetics ministry. The idea is like to defend the Christian faith. And it was like everywhere that I turned in carrying that out, I was discovering that people were presenting arguments to me that had nothing to do with argument per se. They were an idea they picked up from a movie or some sort of something floating around in the culture somehow, and it wasn't. It was like, why are you believing this? Why do I have to answer this objection that you got from Pocahontas? You know, why? And it was frustrating. Pocahontas raises a very, very strong objection.
I'm just imagining in my mind, what color is your wind?
What? I didn't hear that.
Oh, you did.
Yeah, all right. Sorry about that. And it also became clear early on that if we were going to counteract that, as much as I love to write, it wasn't the kind of thing that I would ever be able to do alone. And almost against, not fully planned out, just on a life of its own kind of idea, Athanatos has become a full-scale kind of how can we use the arts to engage our culture in a significant way. And I'm gonna lead this off with our roundtable part of it with Dr. Bull asked me a question and I didn't really give the best answer. I gave a good answer, but it wasn't the best one that I would have given. And then let you guys kind of bounce off of that however you want. So he said, you want to use the arts. This is during my mass media as a weapon seminar. So mass media is a weapon, okay? And I was saying that mass media is being used as a weapon to manipulate people. There are people who are using it intentionally. And we don't want to do that. And he said, but you are producing stuff, so how do you put your work out there without having an agenda when you obviously have an agenda? I mean, he put it much better because he's Dr. Bull. But that's the idea. And my answer was that one of the things that we have as part of our ministry that we try to communicate are some guidelines. Art for the sake of art. You do something not because it's going to achieve a name, but you as an artist say, is this the best possible work that it can be? Whatever it takes. But the other thing I would have said is that culture doesn't have to be seen as something that's you just sort of like a big soup that you try to change the flavor to through manipulation or cooking chemistry or whatever. Sometimes the culture is just what happens, what emerges spontaneously when you have enough people with a certain viewpoint. And we call it a culture, but it was totally spontaneous. And if you have enough Christians and you have enough Christian artists that are out there, you don't have to create a culture. It comes by itself. And that's a good thing, but it still needs to be cultivated. And maybe that is one way we can see what we do at Athanatos, is trying to cultivate all these little changes to the culture simply by changing people. So, does anyone want to feed off that?
Regarding the question of what makes it different, what makes our manipulation, if you want to use that word, different than the mass media, to use your example. I would say that being an artist, you strive to put yourself, like you, into your work. And so you're going to do that, and you're going to be yourself. And as long as you do that, it doesn't matter, if it's manipulative, if it's, what you're trying to do with it, as long as you are authentically being yourself doing it. I mean, obviously the goal is not to try to, manipulate people dishonestly or without them knowing, but the whole point is to put yourself out there, and no matter what, if you do that, if you reach that, if you put a little bit of yourself, just like a little you out there, then I don't think it's an issue. See what I'm saying?
I do. Anyone else? Was it not provocative enough? Was that not provocative enough for you, Joe?
I was waiting for Jamie. We're going by beard length.
By beard length, you win.
Last.
Yeah, the question is fascinating to me because the question presupposes a certain view of the world and of art in general. I have a message when I write, whether it's Butch Gregory or it's my science fiction. I have a message, but I don't know that I would say I have an agenda. I don't know if maybe it's parsing it too much. I want to communicate to the reader something about the world, whether it's we have a problem with too many pastors gone astray and how do you solve that problem, or it's how does the church react to a moral issue, or science run amok in culture. I have a message, but I don't know. I want the reader to read it and be challenged in their worldview, but not to necessarily say you have to adopt my worldview. I think there's some intentional ambiguity in what I try and write. I mean, you may say I missed the mark, but I really want to try and have that intentional ambiguity where the reader can, to me, picking up the pen or the keyboard and to begin to write is an invitation to come and play with me. I'm creating this world. Come play in this world with me.
I feel the same way in a lot of ways. Probably the difference would be that as a writer, I want to give my readers a gift. And I want to give them a great story. I don't want to give them a mediocre story. I don't want to give them a Jesus story. I don't want to give them a Ruth story. God forbid an Esther story. Because those horses have all been whipped beyond recognition. But if I can write something that I enjoy, that makes me laugh, makes me cry, has that piece of me, like you talked about in it, that's authentic and genuine, and the reader reads it and feels hopefully uplifted, and maybe it opens a door into my faith by doing it, that's my goal. And I had that happen recently with a reader of the book who had suffered a terrible tragedy in their life right after they bought the book. And the two are not related, so I don't want you to be nervous about buying a Salt on St. Agnes next door. But the long and the short of it is he spent hours and days in waiting rooms for surgery and ICU waiting to find out if his wife was ever going to walk again. And when he came back to work, I just said, hey, how you doing? How's your wife? And the conversation went, she's fine, but I wanted you to know that your book is just amazing because it left me leave the ICU for hours at a time. I could escape into your world and enjoy what you've written. If I never write another thing again, I've met all my personal goals as an author, just knowing I lifted one person's burden with that story for 7 hours. So that made me feel really great.
Yeah, not just the burden, because hopefully all of my readers won't be going through that, but the idea that they feel a sense of escape
Absolutely.
into this, but in the process of the escape, to have some sober reality that they take with them. So maybe escapism with consequences.
Yeah, I think if there's a common theme with your book, books, plural, and my book, and Paul's book, and a few others, there's some really awful stuff that happens. I mean, tremendously evil, oh God, what's going to happen to my soul, encountering this kind of things. And this press, more than any other press I've ever found, including the really big ones, has got a stable of authors who can present you with something other than the, gee, look, it's a buggy and a bonnet and we're all going to end happily with the bishop's daughter getting married to the beautiful farmer's son. We're not doing that here. We're writing stories of reality and hope and grace and good stories to boot. And because I don't think anybody in this press is trying to force that out or heading out with the Jesus stick to beat people over the head. I think we're turning out some great books. Well, yeah, obviously. So.
This is the man who wrote a parody 50 Shades of Grey, speaking.
Yeah. And with the parody
I have
thing,
no answer to that, really.
it's a wonderful parody. I'm interested in. You clearly have the gift of sarcasm, and what's one of the spiritual gifts? My spiritual gift is cynicism, so I'm with you.
Oh, man, yeah, that's awesome.
So with the sarcasm and your parodies, how do you bridge that gap between ministry and sarcasm?
I don't know that I think of it in those terms, really. I really just wrote that because I hate Justin Bieber. And it was just, like, I just wrote the first chapter, and so, like, the rest of it was really going to be about Justin Bieber and how he's the devil. But that's not entirely not true either, I guess. But
No, he is the
what was
devil.
the question?
Those of you in YouTube, there is nobody in the audience nodding. No one.
The question is that 'cause I love the parody. I love the sarcasm. In my first book, I call it a parody of, it's called Legacy is the title of it, but it could just be called Baptist in Space. You remember the old Muppet show? Muppets in Space. So if Baptists were in space, what's the first thing that they would do? Well, they'd get mad and split. So the spaceship splits. I love the idea of parody and how you can tell a spiritual connection with that.
Well, there's so many things in our culture that to say that they don't reflect the light of Christ would not really, doesn't really cover it. It's sort of an extreme case of just like a bunch of things that they picked up from wherever, a bunch of ways in which they've been manipulated to believe something. And then into that comes 50 Shades of Grey, which is a bunch of different awful things, like it's awfully written about an awful subject with awful characters. And so, like, when I read it, like, which is crazy, and I do not recommend this, but, and I read it, and I had such a reaction to it viscerally that, you start rearranging the story to make it more palatable for you. So I almost had to at least broach writing it for myself. And that's kind of how I write anything. Like, I see something I don't like. Yeah, exactly. Like, I see something I don't like, and then like, I have to almost cleanse it from existence in some way.
When you write a short story,
that's way more honest than...
Your short story is essentially an exorcism. Any story you write.
Yeah, like the love story where the woman drugs the guy at the end.
Okay.
Yes.
O.J. Wolf Smasher is dead.
Right.
It's a crying shame.
Well, maybe I'll write something nice in Amish.
I believe there might be subject material in the neighborhood.
So this tangent here brings up something that always comes up in our writing contest, and then we offer writing workshops. Debbie, who is not here, what's she doing? I don't know. I would. Well, I can speak freely then. She's not here.
I'm here.
I won't tell her.
Oh. Well, I can still speak freely, right? She does these workshops, and we have classes we offer online, and I think one of the larger goals of this festival is to be able to take some of those online interactions and make them happen here. But it always comes up, this question, you're a Christian, can you use a foul word in your story? And a lot of the submissions that we get, or the people who participate, are of the Amish love story persuasion. Or they think that's what the people want, and they like to write. I don't want to psychoanalyze it, I don't understand it. But this usually causes quite a bit of controversy when Debbie says, well, does the story demand it? Will it be less of a story if you don't include whatever it is? then you better include it. Or is it gratuitous? If it's gratuitous of any kind, any gratuitous sentence should be tossed out, whether it's foul or not. I think you'd probably consider every gratuitous sentence foul, would be my guess. So, what do you guys think?
Speaking as a sailor,
Please
whose
don't.
virgin years have never ever heard a word mentioned in a book that he hadn't heard before, and having a salty vocabulary myself, I think it's entirely possible to write a book with earthy characters and just not use curse words, because it does turn readers off, and worst of all, it takes them out of the story. And if you take them out of the story, you've ruined your story. So I think you can do it without it. I think there is an appropriate place for it in some books, especially if you've got characters who are, not necessarily nice people. I'm pretty sure that their vocabulary is not lifted directly from Franklin Graham's last speech. So I don't think it wouldn't horrify me. I'd be okay with it, but I know an awful lot of readers that I've sat around and talked with who didn't know I was an author really would not like it. It bothers them for some reason.
Well, before anyone else jumps in, so we have maybe 15, 20 books that we published through Athanatos, and I don't think we've had a single one that a Christian bookstore has been willing to take.
I'm sorry.
None of them. None of them. No one will take them. You tried, right?
I tried. The first one, The Haunting of Pastor Butch Gregory, I overwhelmingly got rejected from Christian bookstores because the word haunting was in the title. They said that they just could not put that on their bookstore shelf. I just think probably because of the filter. Right? We joke about the buggies and the bonnets, but the big publishing houses serve as a filter for these stores. They know if it's coming from there, then it meets all the requirements. They don't have to read it themselves or proof it themselves. And some of the stuff that we have with ours, you're going to get some language every now and again. I mean, I don't use it in my novels, but in Lineage, my short story, I have a make-believe conversation, make-believe because I invented it, with President Lyndon Johnson, right, who could not say anything without, so he uses, not too terribly salty, but words Jesus used in his language. I think that's fine.
I think one of the reasons we probably don't get into the bookstores is because we have some controversial topics. Excuse me. The simple fact of the matter is, I'm sure the bookstores won't touch mine because it was rejected by one really big publisher who got right down to the publishing board, and they said, geez, you really tick off all the Muslims out there. Like, well, for God's sake, the guy's an Arab terrorist. He's a Muslim. That's how that works. We don't usually have Baptists going around beheading people in shopping malls. It's not a big problem.
Have you read my new book?
Well, Jamie. But my agent at the time was like, well, you think we could tone that down? I kind of got the story. Well, do you think at the end we could at least bring the terrorist to Christ? I just, no, I don't think we can bring the terrorist to Christ, because in general, people bent on genocide don't usually fall into the Christ-following camp after they've done a certain number of things for Allah. But I know that one publishing house, which holds a lot of influence in the industry, just didn't want to risk taking off Muslims. And I thought, but you're publishing all this buggy and bonnet stuff. Who do you think is buying your imprint? Do you think that this thing's going to Dearborn, Michigan, and they're selling it on the street corners if you publish it? I mean, come on. What are the odds you're really going to offend your core audience? But they will not touch controversy at all.
Yeah, so to go back to the just straight up language issue, I think usually it's pretty rare that a story does require it. I think any writer who's worth the salt can get away without that. There's some exceptions, like in the movie The King's Speech, where I think, that movie required the use of that word. And when they tried to take that word out of it, they harmed the story. It detracted. And then on the other hand, you have Quentin Tarantino. And, his movies would be so much better if he didn't put all that in there. And I think sometimes it's just an excuse for not wanting to refine your writing.
Generally, it's just laziness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Are you talking about having profanity in the narrative or in dialogue?
We have not made that distinction yet.
Okay.
Should we?
I think as a writer in narrative, there's no reason at all to have
Oh, sure. Yeah. That would be weird.
in dialogue. Well, no, I mean, there's so many that have it in narrative. I see it all the
The
time.
third person omniscient narrator begins swearing.
Well, no,
Well,
Good idea.
yeah, actually, the hot thing now is first-person narrative. So almost everything I'm reading these days is first-person
well,
narrative.
sure, first-person narrative would be, possibly could be different as well. But I mean, the dialogue is just, does the character do that?
The question for the YouTube audience is it a difference in using profanity for the narrating voice or within the dialogue sphere within the books? And because sometimes you're going to have people that in dialogue, they are individuals that are going to use those words, and that's who they are in some deep and wonderful way. So we've kind of all agreed up here that that's not something we tend to do, but, does it take away from the authenticity of the story? I think you can make things pretty profoundly obscene without ever using an obscene word, just in the way you capture what they're saying and the concepts behind it. So, I don't think you need to do it, but the next book might be so full of expletives that Tony has to brick me in the head. I guess we'll find out.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So to bring both these ideas, maybe three of these ideas all together that we're talking about, one of my complaints then about the books that are in the Christian bookstore, in some ways I'm glad, I'm honored to not be associated with them, in the sense that who's the audience for those books? They're not usually going to be a non-Christian, and I'm not, as an artist, I'm not inclined to producing art with only one audience in mind, that subset. I want it to be something that will be enjoyed as broadly as possible, because if it isn't something that's enjoyable as broadly as possible, it probably wasn't art. It probably was propaganda.
No, I agree. When you, Tony, did all the listings for my books on Amazon, the Kindle and press version I've not wholly published, but it's only in one Christian category of the three that Amazon ranks. And I'm actually pleased with that, because I want people who are cops and special forces and guys in the Coast Guard and women who are police officers and firefighters, I want them reading that book. It's for everybody. It's just that it's from my Christian worldview. And so far, out of 80 reviews, I've only had one person object to that. So I'm cool with that. And if it never sees the inside of a Lifeway bookstore, well, that's the way that's going to go. But
I hope I never see the inside of a Lifeway bookstore.
they have some tchotchkes that are so gorgeous, dude.
It's a Christian trinket store.
Christian trinkets.